Okay. Just a little bit of chazara. We learned that over a beautiful Abarbanel. The Abarbanel, who joins the conversation of the Ramban and the Rishonim as to who wrote Sefer Devarim, Elo Devarim Asher Diber Moshe El Bnei Yisrael, which presents a philosophical dilemma of who wrote Sefer Devarim. So we know that every word came from Hashem. And it says, it doesn't say Vayidaber Hashem Moshe in one place in the whole Sefer Devarim. So we know that Elo Devarim Asher Diber Moshe. So who wrote Sefer Devarim? So the Abarbanel says so beautifully that Moshe Rabbeinu said Devarim. This was a speech that he knew that he had to give Parvus Moav before he died, and he originated the speech. He worked on the speech. It was he used his own Ruach HaKodesh for the Mishnah Torah for the speech, and Elo Advar Moshe Diber Moshe. But what happened? Moshe Rabbeinu said the speech. Hashem loved it, took the speech, godified it, and told Moshe what to write in the Torah regarding his speech. So it may have been exactly the words of Moshe, it may not have been the exact words of Moshe. Moshe's speech was obviously a lot longer. You could read the whole Sefer Devarim in 30 minutes. But Moshe Rabbeinu's speech lasted months, according to some. So it wasn't necessarily, it was Divrei Moshe, but it was reiterated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu until it got to the Madrega of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Amar, and Moshe Rabbeinu was Amar Kosav. He was taking dictation from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But where did Hashem get the speech from? He got it from Moshe Rabbeinu. But it's interesting because the Apocarsim always like to talk about, they don't like to talk about the Torah as being written by God. It bothers them. So they always talk about, the more from Apocarsim, talk about the fact that the Torah was divinely inspired. Okay, it's nice. It was divinely inspired as opposed to Hashem, took a pen and wrote the Torah. It's ridiculous.
Who puts thoughts in our head? I mean, who puts thoughts in our head?
Okay, so that's divinely inspired.
Right.
Yeah, but now you're sounding like the Apocarsim.
No, I'm saying Hashem puts.
But that's
he
not
knows what we're
this
thinking.
This was different. This was not just putting thoughts in Moshe's head. He told them what to write. It was different. Word Bila Babila told them Kadosh Baruch Hu Abar Moshe Abar V'Kasa. It wasn't divinely inspired. But what I'm saying is that you see from this Abarbanel that it actually was quite the opposite. That the Torah was human. At least Mishnah Torah was humanly inspired. It's not that man was inspired by Hashem to write the Torah. It was Hashem was inspired by Moshe to write the Torah, that Hashem wrote the Torah. So on the contrary, Moshe Rabbeinu, it says in the Torah, Hashem wrote, okay, Moshe, now it's your turn. Ela hadvar Moshe diber Moshe. And Hashem wrote Moshe's speech after Moshe said it. So comes Rabbi Tzadok and he says, it takes a philosophical question of Abarbanel of the Ramban, and he says, look what we have here. You have here a situation where a basar v'dam sof kol sof, holy one, but Adonenu Moshe, as the Abarbanel calls him, Adonenu Moshe, says something, and that becomes Torah. So you see here, it says Rabbi Tzadok takes a philosophical discussion. It says, well, look what it means. It means that a person, a human being, has the koach to be mechadish divrei Torah, and then it becomes mamish dvar Hashem. It becomes mamish dvar Hashem. That is a shirish of Torah Sheh BalPeh. You see the concept of Torah Sheh BalPeh. So whether it's Rabbi Akiva, or whether it's Rabbi Shmuel, or whether it's Rabbi Nasi, or Abaye Harava, or us maybe, there's a concept of Torah Sheh BalPeh, which is mamish creating dvar Hashem. What's the difference between Divrei Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and Divrei Moshe? That in the case of Moshe Rabbeinu was the tkufa of Torah Sheh BaKsav. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu took the words of Moshe Amar, and he said them over in Kavyachal, his words, Amar Moshe Amar V'Kasa Seder. But in the case of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, it was Kvar Batla Nevuah. From the time of Purim, there was already no Nevuah, so we didn't have the benefit of it being Torah Sheh becoming Torah Sheh BaKsav. So it remained Torah Sheh BalPeh. That's why Dvarim Sheh BalPeh also Luchos. So there's a different bechina, but still the philosophy of it, the concept of it is the same. That you can see a Torah Sheh BaKsav, a Torah Sheh BalPeh becoming Torah. It didn't become Torah Sheh BaKsav because Hashem was no longer giving dictation. By the time it got to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, or certainly in our times, no longer dictation. But you see that what the sira of a basar v'dam becomes Torah, and then, says Rabbi Tzadok, not only becomes Torah, it becomes even better Torah, because the Torah Sheh BalPeh, in a certain way, is more thorough, and more analytical, and runs deeper. Why? Because it requires our every drop of concentration in kishka in order to do so. In a certain way, the Torah Sheh BalPeh is more chashuv than the Torah Sheh BaKsav. It's a more sophisticated aspect of the Torah where we have to reconstruct. So that's why the mesorah of chazal is, saying what we said already, the mesorah of chazal is, I forgot the term. The mesorah of chazal is that Torah, that the first Luchos are written in Parashat Yitro, and when Moshe Rabbeinu repeated it, he repeated it in Parashat Etchanan and Mishnah Torah and Devarim, that was the second Luchos. It doesn't say the Chumash was the second Luchos. All it says is that Moshe Rabbeinu is telling the story of the first Luchos. So why we say it's the second Luchos? Because the whole Sefer Devarim was Torah Moshe. And the whole Torah Moshe, the whole Sefer Devarim is Torah Sheh BalPeh. So Al Karchach, the second Luchos, are the ones that Moshe Rabbeinu took and digested and integrated and gave it back. So the second Luchos, or the Luchos that Moshe Rabbeinu, let's put it this way, the Luchos that Moshe Rabbeinu described in Mishnah Torah had a Torah Sheh BalPeh aspect to them. And that was the case of the second Luchos. The second Luchos were the shirish of Torah Sheh BalPeh. That's why it works together, that it was in Sefer Devarim Dafka, because the whole Sefer Devarim has a Torah Sheh BalPeh. Second Luchos, so we have a string, a shelshlet. Second, the first Luchos was before there was any chet haEigel. There was a tikun even of the chet of the eitz, and because of that, it was directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There was no struggle. We just kol amroyim es hakolos. It was all very, very clear. But after the haEigel and after the shviras haluchos, where shitcha came into the world, shitcha was a bad thing, but shitcha is a good thing, we learned, because shitcha forces us to reconstruct. Forgetting has a milo to it. It forces us to re-examine and to look at it again. So that was when we got the second set of Luchos. So that second set of Luchos had, in other words, there's logic here, had in it our participation. We have to reconstruct. So the Luchos of Mishnah Torah is all the words of Moshe. So it makes sense. You with me on this? It makes sense that the repetition of the Luchos in Mishnah Torah was Moshe Rabbeinu's was Torah Sheh BalPeh and the Torah Sheh BalPeh, not Torah Sheh BaKsav. In the second Luchos, it says L'man yitavloch. So it comes out that the toiv, it doesn't say in the first Luchos, it says in the second Luchos, because Torah Sheh BalPeh has a bechina of tov over Torah Sheh BaKsav. It's better. L'man yitavloch marachta yamim. So that's what we learned until now. Mashanishar levayer is, why does the toiv appear dafke by kibbut aveim? Why we understand why it says toiv somewhere in Mishnah Torah. We even understand why it says in the Luchos. The Luchos are the shirish of Torah Moshe. But it's interesting that it's in kibbut aveim. Could say lo yisirtzach l'man yitavloch. Be better if you don't kill anybody. Better if you don't commit adultery. L'man yitavloch, it's good for you to do kibbut aveim. This is before we would say Rabbi Tzadok, it seems to me that kibbud av v'aim, I just want to say a svara here, kibbud av v'aim is the mitzvah which is all about tradition. In other words, it's all the mitzvah of taking something, not even necessarily our parents, but taking something from a previous generation and bringing it forward. There's a hishtalshus of Torah Sheh BalPeh, tradition, al titosh Torah simecha. Shema b'nei Moshe Rabbeinu al titosh Torah simecha. So there's kibbud av v'aim is a different type of Torah. It's not just something you read in a book. It's something that I saw, the Beis Abba, something that I grew up with, something that my grandfather did, my great-grandfather did. So
it's something your children will do for you.
Right. So there's a continuation of a mesorah with kibbud av v'aim, and that's why by kibbud av v'aim it says that you know the very famous story of was Rabbi Yaacov Haber's Zatzal was sitting on a plane next to an Israeli minister and a business class, and the sons of Rabbi Yaakov, so the sons of Rabbi Yaakov kept on coming up to the business class. Do you need anything? Can I give you water? So this father was like, you know, how come my kids aren't doing that? How come your kids are doing that? Like, why they keep on coming? So Rabbi Yaakov says, because you teach your kids that you originally came from monkeys, so you're one step closer to the monkeys than they are. They're more sophisticated than you are. Your grandfather was like a monkey. He says, by me, we came from the Yitzir Kapo of Shel Baruch Hu, and I'm one step closer that way. So my kids are Bachabit. So the idea of being Bachabit, the previous generations, in order to give it over to the next generations, is Gufa Torah Sheh BalPeh.
Seems like also kibbud av v'aim is much more vague in terms of, like, you could just keep it's not as well defined. So it's got a Torah Sheh BalPeh element to it. It's not like cut and dry. It's always
and changes.
Always more.
And changes in every generation, right?
In every circumstance.
Right. Send your father an email every day. Changes. It's not the same as Leisir stuff. That's always the same. And I'll kill. Period.
We explain also why it's the fifth mitzvah. It's in the first five between Adam and the Kohen, because without the tradition, without that, we're not going to have the relationship with the Kodesh Baruch Hu.
I must. So that's. I'm saying Laban Yitavlach, that the Torah Sheh BalPeh aspect of the Luchos you see most, I think, in kibbud av v'aim. That's the ever-changing, developing, evolving mitzvah kibbud av v'aim. By the way, I think as years go on, kibbud av v'aim, we can get more sophisticated in kibbud av v'aim, not less. I was just as an example, like in order to kibbud av v'aim in times of the Gemara, you have to be right there. You have to be right there. Today you don't have to be right there. Today you can do things remotely. Skype. Yeah, it becomes more sophisticated. I mean, I don't even mean just being there, but you could actually do things for somebody from far away. Today you can help somebody remotely.
So it's scary. It just piles on the responsibilities more. It's scary because it piles on the responsibilities.
Right, a more developed, beautiful mitzvah. But the mitzvah itself brings out the union of mesorah. Mitzvah itself brings out the union of mesorah. So that's my take. Rabbi Tzadok says, in explaining why does it say toiv, dafka in Mishnah Torah, dafka in the second Luchos, dafka by the mitzvah kibbud av v'aim. Says Rabbi Tzadok, please look inside. Uba'oisan dibrais, in the second dibrais, namar toiv, eitzel kibbud av v'aim. What does it say? Quote, L'man yitavlach v'harachta yamim. The harachta yamim is more what I was explaining. What's the toiv here? Why is it toiv? Ubevadai hach yetiv. What is the toiv here? Hainu hasagas divrei Torah shenikra toiv. Hasaga, grasping, understanding, insight, deep understanding and deep participation in the Torah process. That's Torah Sheh BalPeh, right? Gemara, like we're really working hard. We're not just reading. Not just reading. remember once I was learning the sugya of, back in America, learning the sugya of whether you're allowed to learn Torah Sheh BalPeh at night. We're actually going to get to it. So I remember somebody saying, but that's when my wife and I read scriptures every night. What's so goyish? Read scriptures? Read scriptures? They learn something. And that's by day. So Tzadok is a new knetch here over what I said, that you're zoiche to Torah Sheh BalPeh by doing the mitzvah kibbud av v'eim. We have a Gemara that tells us Ba'avimi. The Gemara of Avimi. You know the Gemara of Avimi? The Gemara of Avimi says like this. Let's learn the Gemara together. Fantastic Gemara. Gemara in Kedushin. Lamed Aleph Amud Beis. Says the Gemara as follows. Let's look at the whole Gemara just so we get a context here. Rav Dimi said a following story. Pam achas hayalavush sirokin shel zahav. He spoke about himself. That one time he was wearing a golden, what do you call the thing that goes on your talus?
Torah.
Atara. A sirokin shel zahav. He was wearing a golden atara. V'hayoshev ben gedolei Romi, and he was sitting in a meeting with the Chosheva politicians of Rome. He was sitting in such a meeting, and he wore a special, like Rabbi Yosef, he wore a special begodim to sit ben gedolei Romi. Ubasa imai, and his mother walked into the room. The karatoi mimeno, and she ripped it off of him. The tafchalei al roshe, she smacked him across the face. V'yarkalei b'fanav, then she spit at him. Lehichlima, and he said nothing. Nafal kordaksin shalosh, she got so excited that her robe started falling off. Haishalosh loited star, and then he picked it up for her, that she shouldn't have tsar. Okay. Says the Gemara, Tani. Avimi brei de Rabavo. Avimi, the son of Rabavo, said, Yesh meichel aviv pasyonei v'tardo min ha'olam. That sometimes you can give your father pasyonei, pheasant, most beautiful food to eat, v'tardo min ha'olam, and you lose your chelek in olam haba. Yesh matchinei b'rachayim, and sometimes you can give him hamburgers, chopped meat, u'mevil olam haba. Rashi brings a story in the Yerushalmi about it's not just what you do, but it's the attitude and whether you do it begrudgingly or not. So sometimes you can give the most expensive thing in the world, but if you're doing it like a mamzer, then adarabi, you lose your chelek. Rashi brings all your Yerushalmi, the whole story. It's not for us. Amar Rabbi Avo. Now that was said by Avimi brei de Rabbi Avo. So Avimi was the son of Rabbi Avo. Omar Rabbi Avo, now Rabbi Avo in a separate statement said, Ki goin Avimi bri, if you want to understand kibbud av v'eim, look at my son Avimi. What's his name? Hu ki a mitzvahs kibbud, says the Gemara. He did the mitzvah of kibbud av v'eim. What was his mitzvah? Chamisha b'nei samche havilei Avimi. Avimi himself had 5 chashiv sons, meaning 5 chashiv grandsons to Rabbi Avo. They all had smicha. Big thing. So it was Rabbi Avo, Avimi, well, it was called Avimi because I guess he didn't have smicha, and 5 sons that did have. Havilei Avimi b'chayi avim, and they were the father was alive, the grandfather, in other words, was alive when the sons were here. V'chei avi asi Rabbi Avo, when Rabbi Avo would come walking in the room, Kare Abava, my son Avimi, would run to the door. Roit va'azal upsachle. He would himself run to the door to open the door for his father. Va'amar in. The whole way that he was running, he would say, I'm here, I'm coming, in. as opposed to just opening the door, that he shouldn't even think for a second that somebody's not opening the door for him, ad demate hasam, until he would reach there. So Rashi says, afil hachi, what's the kibbut of over here? Afil hachi gavi kara rebavo ababa hayavrimi ratzu b'seich v'lein eniach le'echan mibadav leilach. He didn't let his sons. He let open the door for Zaidi. Right? So you think there's a double mitzvah, because how you have the mitzvah of keep it off by listening to me, and there's a mitzvah of being Muhammad the Zayda, right? So no, that's how he did it. That's already a lumdus. If you're a lumdus, you're not doing keep it off. His father's coming, he runs. I was at a bris a month or two ago near Shel, and I was talking to somebody who was a Talmid Chacham, and like we're having a discussion. In the middle of a sentence, my sentence, he just took off this guy, and I said, "Wow, that was rude." just took off, But I saw he ran to the door. His father walked in. So it was actually a very. It was actually a beautiful thing. I mean, I don't know that to be rude. He goes, "Excuse me," but just ran like it was like nothing, like the middle of a sentence. I thought, "Ooh." So the Gemara says as follows: Yom Echad. This is the Kudah of Rabbi Tzadok. Yom Echad. There was one time with this Avimi bar Rabbi Avo. So we're talking about the cover that Rabbi Avo got. Yom Echad Omer Le. One time, Rabbi Avo said, I told him, Ashkayani Maya. I need a cup of water. Can you bring me some water? Ad Oisele, by the time he brought the water, Nimnem, I fell asleep. Gochin and my son had the glass of water, and he leaned over me the entire time I was sleeping. We don't know what that was, maybe 7 hours, 8 hours. The whole time he was sleeping, Gochin in Koile Hadita Iter, and he held the glass of water there, so I should have it the second that I woke up because he asked me for water. So that's what he said, a story of his son Avimi. And that's keep it up. Istaye Milse, says the Gemara. This worked out. He had siyata d'shmaya because of this. My son Avimi had siyata d'shmaya for this. The Darash Avimi, because Avimi darshan mizmer la'asaf Elohim ba'in goyim benach lasecha. He was zocha to darshan the parak in Tilim Ayin Tes of mizmer la'asaf. So Rashi says, Istaya Milsa, ba'oidoi gachum lefanov. While he was leaning there with the water, he was thinking and learning, and it was in the schus of the kibbut of that he was mechadesh a whole new pshat in mizmar la'asa. In other words, it was the schus of kibbut of that he said a chiddush. What was his chiddush that he said? Haven the medrash. He said over him, in other words, he was the medrash. He was the medrash of Avimi, which opened up the eyes, by the way, of all of Klal Yisrael, because it says, Mizmar Echad Shebesefer Tehillim. He was thinking that there's a Mizmar in Tehillim, Shloi Haya Mavin by Koidem, that nobody understands. He didn't understand. That what was the Mizmar? Mizmar La'asaf. Think about this for a second. Mizmar La'asaf, Asaf, let's say that's David. Elohim Bo Goyim Benach Lasecha. The Babylonians are coming and are going to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. So for Avimi, while he's standing there with the glass of water, Mizmar LaDavid, what the heck is David thinking about? Oh, Goyim and Achlosacha, right? They're coming with their big machar, the Beis Hamikdash. Kina La Asaf Miboyle. This was a Kina, this wasn't a Mizmar. Rashi. So V'darash Kach. So Avimi said, why does it say Mizmar La Asaf and it doesn't say Kina La Asaf? So he darshan the famous drasha, Hamar Asaf Shira al Shekila Kadosh Baruch Hu Chamasei. Kadosh Baruch Hu let out his anger al haEitzim al ha'avanim, on the building, on stones and on wood. Shebebeisai. That's where he let out his anger, as opposed to killing and wiping out the Jewish people, because we were doing Avodah Zarah Gilui Arayis and Shvichas Damim. So I destroyed the bayis. So David HaMelech Baruch HaKodesh saw that the house that he so much wanted to build is going to be destroyed, and he had a simcha from the fact that it was destroyed. So now he gave like HaKadosh Baruch Hu something to take his anger out on, as opposed to taking it out on Klal Yisrael. So he said, okay, so here's David HaMelech, which is in itself such a deep thing. Here's David HaMelech. He's praying to build the Beis HaMikdash in the Kapitel Tehillim before. Let me build the Beis HaMikdash, and then he's saying a mizmor. He's singing his heart out in delight over the fact that it gets destroyed. Why? Because at least it gets destroyed, and the people don't get destroyed. So there's an anger pad for Hakadosh Baruch Hu. This was the chiddush of Avimi when he was standing over his father with a glass of water. Achikila Hakadosh Baruch Hu chamasai. And that's why the Jews survived. Shel Malekach, said Avimi, if it wouldn't be for the Beis HaMikdash and the fact that Hashem was able to take out this anger someplace. I'm sure this is all very deep theology, but let's just say simple pshat. Lo yishtayer mehem sarid, that nothing will be left from us. There was a punitive measure that could be taken without touching the people themselves. So we say in Kinos, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu released his anger and started a fire on Zion. So this is the okay. So that's a beautiful Gemara. What's up? Just like he's bringing his father a glass of water. He's leaning over his father, and of all the chidushim that come to mind, he's machadash. Mizmor la'asaf, the gavos of the Chorban Beis HaMikdash. What's it have to do with kibbut avein? The whole Gemara says lamdeni. What's the taich? Says the genius. Shehesig hasoid mashenamar mizmar. Avimi understood the secret of mizmar ala Chorban. Shalidei haChorban v'hagolus, because of the Chorban, because of the Golus, because of the Siluk Shechina, because there's no Shechina, Zachu, because of that, what do we have? Lahasagas ha'arki toiv. Because of the Chorban, that was the ending of prophecy. That was the ending of Torah Sheh BalPeh. What happened when Torah Sheh BalPeh ended? What happened when Nevuah ended? Time of Achashverosh, what happened? Kimu v'kiblu haYehud. There was a new Kabbalah HaTorah because of it. So it's so hard to see positive and negative, isn't it? It's so hard to see without being disrespectful to the negative thing that's going on. But what happened at this moment was, at the moment of the Chorban Beis HaMikdash, with all of the screaming and crying and horrible things that were going on, Torah Sheh BalPeh was born. Torah Sheh BalPeh is most exemplified through the mesorah of kibbut avein. So this is what the holy Avimi was thinking while he was holding his glass of water by his father who was sleeping. That mizmar la'asaf, that we have something like you said, that was like a mitzvah that evolves, a mitzvah that keeps on requiring new chiddush, a new pshat, b'chlal mitzvah which has to do with altitosh terasi mecha with Torah Sheh BalPeh. All of this came about. This was the mizmar of David HaMelech. The mizmar of David HaMelech was over the Chorban because the Chorban caused Torah Sheh BalPeh to happen. Not for a Chorban, there wouldn't be any Torah Sheh BalPeh. You can't. I don't want to be disrespectful. I'm just like everybody. I'm very moved and disturbed by the what's going on here in Israel. The whole country's walking around with a stomachache over these poor kids. But send an army after them, like amazing. But like the amazing silver line. The first time that I remember, maybe in the time of Nachshon Maxwell. Such an achdus, not just people everywhere are davening, but being careful to daven at the same time to have a bigger effect. So you have literally like Datilu Mi and Satmar Chasidim and everyone's davening. Like it's a very moving thing. Yesterday, 2 days ago, they had the tefillah by the Koso. So they made it in Chaim Berlin Yeshiva, of all places, in Flatbush. They made a tefillah to be toem with the tefillah of the kotel, and they had out in the streets. There's like they say thousands of people with the speakers that wanted to daven at the same time as the kosel. So so of course there's too big of a carbon to bring, but like that you have to do this to have a little bit of achdus. But there's a mizmar here. There is a mizmar here in the. at least it should bring the people together. Better would, is they should have a Yeshua.
What was the feeling of David HaMelech writing this Mizmor? This was a Tanchumen, this was
what was the Shira?
It was the Shira. The Shira was that, okay, we will get, there's going to be a Chorban, which is not very good, but we will, so we're kind of like forgetting about the Chorban. And
Look, he made kinos, and he cried over the Chorban.
This was a Shira.
But there was a Shira aspect to it also. So you have to, that's what I'm saying, you have to be big enough to be able to see, to darshan the Torah without being disrespectful to the Ra. Not saying it's okay. Nobody's saying it's okay that there's a Chorban Beis HaMikdash. Saying, but there is one part of this whole story here, which is a mizmor, and it's a big mizmor that came out of Torah. So it's like it Torah Sheh BalPeh. It's like when Moshe Rabbeinu broke the Luchos. Everybody's crying, and Hashem is saying Yasher Koyach Sheshibarta. Okay, Yasher Koyach. Like at the end, it came out Torah Sheh BalPeh.
That's Rabbi Akiva crying when
laughing. So he says, he speaks this out. But it's just brilliant. It takes it a step further than Rashi. Not just that he was Machadish this Torah, but he was Machadish this Torah. After this Torah, while he was doing the mitzvah kibbut of, just to add one little piece, when you're standing over, here, you just imagine this, he's standing over he ran to get a glass of water, and to give his father a drink, and his father's sleeping, so he missed it. Okay, shucks. Leave it on the table. That's like this. So to stand there and feel like you're doing something completely useless. It's completely useless when you stand there with a glass of water. My sons are in the other room waiting to learn with me. They have smicha. That's what the Gemara says. It's completely useless. But that what seems to be so completely useless was he was machadish istaya milsa, says the Gemara. He was machadish divrei Torah that changed the whole Klal Yisrael. Because this gave this al eitz of avodim drasha by Avimi, who I don't know would know anything else about Avimi except for this one drasha. This drasha changed the attitude of all Klal Yisrael and taught us to go further.
Doesn't it teach you also that if you're in the middle of a mitzvah, you can't do another mitzvah?
Yeah, but I thought we learned from what's his name? Ben Nasina. What's his name? The goy who did kibbut avim. And when he wanted the stone for the choshen, right? So the father would have loved for him to be woken up. So he did the wrong thing. So it wasn't, even though it's an example of kibbut avim, it was wrong because it wasn't what the father would have wanted. So I question in this case, right? But in this case, you wonder why would the father want him standing there the whole time? It seems like a steer. I'm saying
why wouldn't he want him standing there? I mean, nobody wants to be matriach their son.
Yeah, but for nothing. It's once you've been matriach.
No, it's not like Dimi Ben Nasina. He stood to lose, $1 million because he didn't want to wake up his father.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Over here, you're right. You could be out there. You could be playing chess. You could be watching TV. You could be reading the newspaper. You're standing here over me to see that if I wake up, I should eat a...
Now I'm comparing to learning with his sons, and maybe the father would want him to learn with his sons.
If he was learning. I did not, unfortunately, excel in the mitzvah of kibbut av. But a couple of weeks ago, when I was at the hospital, and it was all night. I was standing, watching my father. And I thought to myself, he doesn't even know I'm here. Like, what's the what am I doing here? And it starts going through my head. Well, that tomorrow, how am I going to give the shear that I'm supposed to give in the morning, and how am I supposed to do this, and how am I supposed to do that? Then I remember this Gemara. That's why it's so emotional. You stand with the glass of water and istaya bilsa, like who knows what chiddush. The only thing is I didn't come up with anything. No life-altering messages here, but
the idea is that it's not for the father you're doing it, you're doing it for yourself.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if
you're doing it for it's even deeper than yourself. You're doing it for the concept of kibbut av v'aim. There's a concept of a chain which goes from the beginning of the world until the end of the world, and this is a link which I'm not letting break. It's an important link. And the truth of the matter is, there is so much. Like everybody, you go through an Avelos, and everybody, is the same thing. And I'm not knocking it; it's true. Everybody says the same thing. Like, oh, it's a door acher. It doesn't exist anymore. It's a different door. But that's why you got to make it exist. Like that's the whole. Why shouldn't it exist anymore? Why shouldn't the Tamim Tiyem Hashem Elokecha exist? Why shouldn't the Emunah Pshuta exist? Why does our sophistication have to make us into robots? Bunch of our whole bodies are there just to carry around our head. Like why does it have to be that way? So the whole idea of Kibbud Avei is to show kavod, to something which no longer exists. That's kufid, and make it exist. That's the kibbud. Keep the Torah. That is Torah Sheh BalPeh. That's Torah Sheh BalPeh. The Luchos Rishonos broke. I'm going to say that's it. Just like when the Chorban Bayis Rishon happened. Okay, that's it. That's it. That's the end of it. Let's just assimilate and go on. Even said there were Tanoim even said that. Rabbi Shmuel said that. Okay. So much for Klal Yisrael. Like we're thrown out of Eretz Yisrael. The base of English was destroyed. Nimsa b'nei Yisrael. Kal Yabelam. That's what Rabbi Shmuel said. So Klal Yisrael will become extinct, like the minks and like the lizards and the dinosaurs will go extinct. But no, the idea of the Torah Sheh BalPeh being destroyed is now we have to work harder. We have to work harder. So bring it forward. And bringing it forward came back to Luchos or more chashiv. With the Luchos Rishonos. That was after all, that was the one that was at the Aron Kodesh, right? The Luchos Shli'as. The Shivrei Luchos were also there, but the Luchos Shli'as were of a major kedusha. So he finishes. So that's just a brilliant thought of Rabbi Tzadok. Sha'yidei ha'chorban v'ha'golos v'siluk ha'shchina zachol la'hasagas ha'or ki toiv. That's the toiv by Kibbud Avei. The Torah Sheh BalPeh. Shezehu mizmar. That's a mizmar. V'shira. Moshe Isa. The Gemara says in Erechon, Ezu avodah shebesimcha v'tuv leiv zu shira. How do you do avodas Hashem besimcha or v'tuv leiv? By singing. Singing is the derech of the Levim saying. That's the derech of whistle while you work. That's the derech of showing that I'm not just doing the avodas Hashem. I'm singing. I'm happy.
How you show Ava. That's how you show Ava.
Yeah, Ava. Ava is through singing.
Also, Kibbud Avei is that's the same concept there.
They say that Rabbi Yaakov Zatzal, whatever he learned, he was singing. A lot of people sing when they're learning, but in my mind I have like this indelible. I went to ask him a Shaila years and years ago in Oil Sarah. Sarah is called the Meisharim there. And I was standing outside. Nobody was there, but they told me I can go. This was years ago now. I'm talking about 35 years ago. So to ask him whether I should keep 1 day yontiv or 2 days yontiv, because I was about to get engaged. And Shiva Scheiberg was in America, so I couldn't get a hold of him. So I asked Rabbi Yaakov. I remember standing there on the little street there in Mei Sharm and listening in, being afraid. He was kind of afraid to walk in. Rabbi Yaakov was learning. I didn't want to disturb his learning. He was up and he could. And he was just singing so beautifully, all by himself at the base medrash. He was just like singing so beautifully. And I still remember like a beautiful voice and just singing Galardi. I could have stood there all day. I was like mesmerized. I just sat there. We would take a chair, sit there, forget about the shadows, forget about life, just sit there listening to
I
it.
did exactly.
You did the same?
Exactly. I went there. They said.
Oh, I thought you were saying. What?
And I went down the street and waited. I just waited till I finished, but I was just letting him singing. I was completely
wild, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Echoing
the Sikus and Simcha and Torah. So that's Ezu Avodah Shebesimcha V'tuv Leiv Zu Shira. V'chein Torah Sheh BalPeh. Here's Tzadok traveling through Shas. V'chein Torah Sheh BalPeh Nikra Shira. We find the Torah Sheh BalPeh is called Shira. Moshe Darshu. The Gemara says in Avodah Zarah. Upalayla Shira Imi. Was even in Eicha. Kubi Roini Bala HaEigel. Allah Isaac B'Torah, B'Layla Shira Imai, that you learn Torah at night, that's called Shira, that's called music, singing. Or B'Layla, whenever you talk about Torah at night, and here's the sugya that reading the scriptures at night, whenever you're learning Torah at night, it's always talking about Torah's Halayla is Torah Sheh BalPeh. Or B'Layla Hainu Torah Sheh BalPeh, Kamash Yisa B'Targum, it's Mefurish Targum, and Shira Shirim, on that pasuk. V'hainu, and that's the pshat to Dvarim Shebiksav Yata Rashai Loimer BaPeh. There's a big difference between Torah Sheh and Torah Sheh BalPeh. Well, B'layla, there's a practical thing here. B'layla, she'ef sheliros b'tech haksav. How can you read Torah Sheh B'layla when there's no electricity? For generations, there was no way to concentrate on because to them, to learn Torah Sheh B'ksav wasn't mean, well, let's learn Tanakh. What they were doing is they were medayik at every tag, at every nuance of the syllables. So you need a good light. So Torah Sheh B'ksav was the daytime learning, and Torah Sheh BalPeh was the nighttime learning. It's so significant, ba'omek hadavar, in the machshava of the thing, is because Laila is a time when things are down, darkness, and that's the time when the biggest Chidushei Torah come forth. So it comes out significant, like Halidavarhu, that Torah Sheh B'ksav, okay, daytime. You see, like when you say Shema during the day, so you say Emes v'yatziv v'nachayim v'kayim v'yashar v'nemlan v'ahu v'chavim v'nechma v'nayim v'nayra v'adir v'sukkot v'kubal. You see it all. Unbelievable how you can see the details of all the godless of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. At night you say, well, Emes v'emunah. Emunah, you don't see the yatziv v'nachayim v'kayim v'yashar. You can't see everything. You're walking in the dark. You don't see all that stuff. But you have to look. You have to do deep inside, deep inside, to be able to have a Buddha. I trust you, Hashem. So who's the one who's walking more with Hashem? The one who's walking with Amunah, the one who's walking with the 14 mitos. So Amunah comes from deep inside. So the bechina of Laila is the bechina of Torah Sheh BalPeh. We have to struggle from within to be able to be machadash. Do you want to say Rabbi Yaacov?
No, that's what I'm trying to say for Dimi, because at night time, or whoever's sleeping, his father's sleeping, that's when you machadash.
Oh, beautiful. I wasn't trying to say that, but that's nice.
Is winter more associated also with Torah Sheh BalPeh?
Yeah. You see, the Chag HaOyros, Hanukkah, comes in the darkest day, the winter solstice, like the darkest day of the year, because the Chashmonaim were fathers of Torah Sheh BalPeh, if you will, the early Chashmonaim. That's why it's called Shira. If you learn without Zimra, it's the Gemara ends off there that you're not really understanding. See, let me just add one nekuda here before we close for the week. That Shira specifically is an interesting word because Shira is lashon of shiar, like leftover, spillover, shiarei halev. The shiarei halev. So there's a difference between performing music and music which comes sort of from the outside in to your own shira. Like it's not called a shira unless it's spilling out from your lathe. Even if you heard the niggin someplace else, I'm not saying you have to be mechadish nigunim like Rabbi David here. I'm just saying that even if I'm singing somebody else's niggin, but it's only called the shira, so that's why the shiras hayam was so special, that it wasn't like, that they handed out the papers and okay, everybody, let's all sing together. We're all no. It was like a sort of something, a spontaneous thing that came from the shir. Now it wasn't really spontaneous. What happened was, the Gemara says in Megillah, that Moshe Rabbeinu sang it, which is also nice. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu sang it, and everybody sang it. But everybody sang it after him. But it came from Min Halev. So shira means that it's shiarei halev. It's only shira called shira if it's. That's why sometimes shira is song, and sometimes shira is poetry, and sometimes shira is Torah Sheh BalPeh, because it's whatever comes forth from the human heart and the condition of the soul at that moment, which is giving forth shira. The Chassam Sofer, they say, had no koach of nigun at all. Unlike Rav Yasha, Chassam Sofer, like he couldn't sing and he didn't have an ear for music and he didn't. I don't know if he didn't have an ear for music, but he couldn't sing anyway. That's how I know. But they say that there was some type of a simcha, and one of the rebbes came, one of the Hasidic rebbes, And the Hasidic rabbis, many Hasidic rabbis played the violin. So it was fairly common amongst Hasidic rabbis to play violin. So the Rebbe came and he played the violin by Simcha, and the Chassam Sofer was there. The Chassam Sofer was the Gadol Hador. I mean, Chassam Sofer is hard to even compare to anybody who's alive. About the whole world was makabel the Chassam Sofer as the Posek Hadar. He was like really, you know, the speaker and a Posek and a leader of Klal Yisrael and Malashkafa, Malach, everything. But he couldn't sing. The only thing he couldn't do is he couldn't sing. So when he heard the violin, he was listening to the Rebbe with the violin, and apparently it was B'kedusha. He got up and he said, "I'm willing." He said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I presume, "I'm willing to give away half of my Torah to be able to do what he just did." Some Sefer said. So you know, like I call the Luchos, like they're crazy with this money. How can you give away even what Taisvis? But I think that the Omek Hadavar is what did he mean by that? That here's something. I'm not sure if my Torah is coming from my brain or if it's coming from my where how deep is this Torah that I'm saying? I don't mean how deep is it, how hard is it to understand, but from what place is it coming in within me? That niggin is coming from very, very deep within him. And the Chassam Sofer felt he couldn't access that. Chassam Sofer, he couldn't access that. So he said, okay, I'll give away my Torah. I'll give away half my Torah. Not all of them, but half my Torah to be able to access a certain part of the lave that can come up with that shear. Because shear is shear elay. So it's okay.